With us in studio to shed more light on the situation is our Chief International Affairs Editor, Rob Parsons. Rob, protests, pretty massive protests, just a few days after the Russian president had gone on national TV to try and convince people of the need for these pension reforms.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most important thing, that it happened so soon after President Putin appeared on national television. That was an attempt by him to persuade the Russian people of the absolute necessity of going through with this reform. Many people, however, don't seem to have listened. The fact that these demonstrations happened so soon afterwards is a little bit of a slap in the face to President Putin. Yes, the demonstrations weren't that big, just 9,000 in Moscow, 1,500 here, 1,500 there, but the spread across Russia was big. And I think the concern in the Kremlin will be that the weight of President Putin, because it's very unusual for President Putin to appear and speak on television directly to the Russian people in this way. The fact that it seems to have failed to have its effect will be causing concern, and I think the big issue will be further down the road, are we going to see more demonstrations?
Remind us, Rob, what exactly is the proposed reform? What does it involve? And he already had to water it down somewhat, didn't he? Yeah,
I mean, the first thing that has to be said, Eve, is this reform is absolutely essential. Russia simply cannot afford the pension system it's got at the moment. The population is both is aging, and the number of people going on to pensions is simply too big for the system to cope with. In a situation of demographic crisis which Russia is facing at the moment, with the population, as I said, aging but also shrinking, something has to be done about it. The estimation is that by about 2040, there will be as many people on pensions in Russia as there are in jobs. So the question arises, who's going to pay the taxes to sustain the pension system? So in that, at least, President Putin is absolutely right. So they introduced this pension reform and put it to the Russian people during the World Cup in the hope that people wouldn't pay too much attention to it, moving the pensionable age from 55 to 63 for women and from 60 to 65 for men. The uproar that followed was enough to reduce President Putin's popularity from about 80% to 67%, hence his appearance probably on Russian television. He came up with a slightly softer version so that women would be able to retire not at 63 but at 60. But as we've seen from those demonstrations, that doesn't seem to have washed either.
No, slight changes there. But you mentioned there we've seen demonstrations and there could be more. How likely do you think that we'll see the energy of these demonstrations continue?
Well, there are more demonstrations planned for next weekend, called this time by leading Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny. He's been put in prison, incidentally, just after announcing that there were going to be protests against the pensions. So they've tried to get him out of the way in the hope that that will undermine the protests. I think that's unlikely to happen. The fact of the matter is anger is really deep about this in Russia. It affects so many people. One thing you have to remember, too, about Russia is that the average life expectancy for a male in Russia is 66 years. 43%, it's estimated, of Russian men will not, therefore, live to see their pensions. I think that is really at the heart of what is driving these protests. So unless something is done to address that, I think the protests are going to carry on for some time and perhaps get deeper and bigger.
Indeed, when you read that life expectancy, you can certainly understand the anger there. Rob Parsons, thanks a lot for that analysis of the situation in Russia.